Good morning, students. Hopefully, it's a good morning. So I hope you are able to see the screen that is shared. Okay. So we had discussed about what exactly this subject is and what we'll be going through in our offline session. But of course, for those who have not attended the classes, so here is a brief introduction to the syllabus of system software and compilers. So of course, the CIE part and the SE part you are already familiar with. So your CIE will be for 50 and your SE marks is going to be for 60. So that's for sure. And in this course, you'll have some uh, objectives, like you should be able to understand the concept of what exactly is system software, and you should be also familiarize yourself with the source file, object file, executable file, file structures, and libraries. Of course, these things are going to be also discussed under our laboratory sessions. And most importantly, you should be able to describe and understand the front end and the back end phases of a compiler and how basically a compiler works. Okay, so of course, I believe you might be familiar with compilers. So this is how the subject is organized. So there is module 1 to module 5. So from module 1 to module 2, we will be focusing on few systems. Of course, we'll start with introduction and then we'll focus on few system softwares, especially like assemblers and other system softwares like loader and linker. Then in module 2, we will be focusing on the compiler, and from there, from module 2, module 3 will cover the basic aspects of the compiler, and followed by module 5. Module 4, we will learn a specific tool which are required for us in order to develop a compiler as such. So these tools are called as Lex and Yak, and these Lex and Yak tool are actually used in our laboratory sessions as well. So at the end, you will be able to explain the system software. Suppose you need to understand what exactly system software is, and you also need to understand the design and development of the lexical analyzer, parser, as well as code generator. And you're supposed to utilize this Lex and Yak tool, as I mentioned, for implementing the different concepts of system software. So this is how the subject is organized. Um, when it comes to textbooks, there is one called as System Software by Leland and Beck. So third edition it is. So you might get this book as PDF online as an ebook. Then there is Alfred Aho and Ullman, Compiler Principles Technique. This is going to be our second book. This will be for compilers. You can also get this book online or as an ebook format. And the last one is Doug Brown. This is for Lex and Yak, right? So of course we will look into reference book if required, but these three are essential for us to continue, right? So this is the brief introduction about the syllabus. So let us just begin. Alright. So we'll start with the introduction to our system software. Because this is the book that I talked about, the Land and Beck. So third edition is there. At least you can get a latest version also. Right. So let us just simply like this. Right. Okay. So of course, the first thing that we are supposed to know is what exactly is a software for those who are new to the class. So we first need to understand what is a software because we are studying about system software in the first place. So what do you mean by a software? So I believe everybody will answer the same thing. Like software is basically a set or a collection of programs. Correct? So basically, we use this set of programs or collection of programs to accomplish a particular task or maybe to solve a particular problem. So that's what a software is. Now, based on this definition, we can categorize software into two different types. So a software does something on a computer system. So that's basically a collection of programs that does something. So based on that, we can categorize software into two different types. So one of them is called as the application software, and the second one, of course, is studying, which is called as the system software. So these are the two major categories of software that exist. So we have the application software and we have the system software. Of course, we need to know the differences as well. So first of all, let us try to identify which are the application software and which are the system software. So have we used any application software as of now? Yes, of course, we have been using several application software. Like now, for example, I'm using Microsoft PowerPoint, right, to present this lecture. So that's the software that I'm using currently. So I can call it as an application software. Okay. So Google Meet we are using. So that's also an application software. All of you are using Google Classroom as well. That is also an application software. Okay, basically it's an app, but for now we'll consider it as an application software. So you might have used calculators in your computer system. That is also an application software, and you might have also used browser, right? So that is also an application software. You might have played games, watched videos, right? So whatever you have used to do all of this stuff, so all comes under the category of application software. So if all of these are application software, then have we used system software or not? That's the next question, right? So of course we have used system software because system software actually makes our computer usable. Okay, or in other words, the application software, whatever we have used, if they are supposed to run on your computer system, then you need the help of system software, right? So system software basically makes your computer usable. Or without this software, it's not possible for us to run application software as such. Okay, so have we used any then? Okay, of course, sometimes we have used these system softwares directly and sometimes we use them indirectly, right? For example, all of you might have executed C program. Okay, so you have written a program in C. Now you would like to run this particular program on your computer system. So how will you run that program? So normally we have, if we are using a Linux environment, then we have used a command called as cc followed by the name of the program. Now what is this cc basically? So this cc stands for C compiler. Okay, cc stands for C compiler. So this program basically translates, runs your, it does not run by the way, but it translates your program from high level language, which is C, to machine level language. Okay, to machine level language, right? So we have written your program in high level language, which is C programming, and it will be converted or translated to machine level language. Right? So this is one system software that we have actually made use of. So what is the purpose of this system software? The purpose of the system software is basically to translate the program in high level language to machine level language. Okay, why? Because we have written the program in high level language that is easy for us to write and understand, but the machine does not understand that. So it only understands zeros and ones or binary language. So we have written in high level language and machine does not understand that. It only understands machine level language. So if I want my program to be executed, then what do I need? I need somebody to translate this program in high level language or convert that program in high level language to a machine level, right? So who does that for us? So it's basically the compiler. Okay, so it basically translates our high level language to a machine level language. So that's the job of the compiler in this case, or CC as we mentioned. Okay, it's something like you know Kannada and I know only English. So if I want to communicate with you, then of course I need somebody who knows both the languages. So one who understands both English as well as Kannada. So whatever I speak in Kannada, sorry, whatever I speak in English, so he can translate that to Kannada. Right? So it's something similar here. So we have written program in high level language, but it is only understood in terms of machine level language. So we need a program that actually translates that. So compiler is one such example or one such system software that is required for a computer or by a computer in order to run your programs. Okay, because we know that softwares are written in high level language. So that program, if it has to be run on the machine, then I need some program or I need another software that can actually translate that to machine understandable format. So this is the job of compiler, which is a system software, right? So one more system software you have used, which is the assembler. Of course, you have come across this in your microcontroller and microprocessor, where you had written a program in assembly level language. You can write ASM for that. So you had written programs in assembly level language and they have to be executed. Now, once again, assembly level language is obviously a programming language that is closer to us, okay, or understandable by us. So it basically makes use of mnemonics or short forms, and it is not understood by the machine once again. So machine only understands machine level language, right? So what we are supposed to do, we're supposed to translate this program in assembly level language to machine level language. And who does that? Assembler. Okay, so assembler is basically the program or the software that actually translates your assembly level language into machine level language. So this is one more example of a system software that you have actually used, right? Now other examples are also there, like as I mentioned in the introduction, that there are programs like loaders, there are programs like linkers, okay, there are loaders and there are linkers, and there are macro processors, which are also a part of your system software group. And there are debuggers. So all of this and text editors. So all of this basically are a collection of programs. Okay. Or you can call a group of programs that we can call as a system software. So whenever you are using an application software, remember that these application software in turn makes use of system software. Okay, so your application program might be written in C. Now to execute this application program on my computer system, I need a compiler. Okay, so this is how things basically works. So let us look into the definition of system software then. Of course, now it will be clear for you to understand what exactly it does. So what is a system software? So system software consists of a variety of programs that supports the operation of a computer system. Okay. So as I mentioned, all those softwares, compilers, assemblers, loader and linkers, debuggers, so all of them are a variety of programs that helps the operations on a computer system, or in other words, they actually make your system usable. So if you want to access the hardware that is present on your computer system, you can't access it directly. You can, but it will be very difficult to handle. So things are handled by the system software, and it is being made convenient for you to make use of. So this is the purpose of using a system software. Now, these system software are either implemented as a software, or they might also be implemented as a firmware, or they can be hardwired, or they can be hardware programs, or they can be software programs. Okay, so this is one thing, but of course, they are meant to make your computer hardware usable, right? So when system software takes care of the uh, things at the bottom level, then this provides an advantage for the software developers or whoever develops the application software, because they need not know the internal workings of a machine. So simply they can focus on developing their application without bothering about how exactly things work or how exactly you have to handle the computer system. So this is one of the major advantage of using a system software. So it makes your job in the sense, it makes the application programmer's job easier and lets him focus on only developing the application and not bothering about how exactly the system operates, right? So this is how we can define a system software. Now, of course, we need to know the difference between application software and system software. So one of the major difference between application software and system software is the machine dependence. Okay. So what do you mean by this machine dependence? So machine dependency means, for example, if I take a program or a system software, if I have developed a system software for a computer system, let me say C1, okay, and if I try to run that same system software on some other machine with a different architecture, then it may not run. Okay, then it may not run. Then I can say that this particular system software is dependent upon computer one. Okay, or you also use the term called as portability. So it is not portable. This particular system software is not portable. It only runs on machine C1, right? So this is called as machine dependency. So if it is possible for you to run a particular software or a program on different machines, irrespective of their architecture, then it is called as machine independent. But if it is dependent on the machine, like if you cannot run them on other machines with a different architecture, then we say that it is machine dependent. Now, most of the system softwares are machine dependent. Now, why they are machine dependent? Of course, you know that they are the one that access the hardware directly. Okay, so they are the one that access the hardware directly. Now, depending upon the hardware, the system software is going to be designed. So, if the hardware of a machine changes, right, if the hardware of the machine changes, then of course it's not possible for me to run the same system software on a different hardware. Okay, so this is the reason why most of the system software are machine dependent, right? But the application software, they are not machine dependent. Why? Because they simply make use of system software. Whatever system software is available on that particular machine, they use them to run on those particular hardware. So their burden is actually taken up by the system software. So they are machine independent, whereas system software is machine dependent. So this is one of the major difference between system software and application software. And in turn, we know that the system software programs are basically intended for the operation and use of the computer system itself, but application softwares focus only on that particular application. Okay, like for example, if I take a calculator, right? What's the purpose of a calculator? The purpose of a calculator is to do calculations. That's it. It is particular to that application, right? So if you take any other application software, like for example, a browser, right? So if you take browser, then its purpose is to provide an interface through which you can communicate over the internet. So that's the application, right? And it focuses only on that, right? But how does it achieve its task or accomplishes its task? It achieves it through various system software. So in order to run this application, it needs support on the computer system. So the support is provided by system software. Okay, so this is the major difference. So application software is particular to an application, right? That is one of the major difference. So it basically takes a problem and solves it or provides a solution for that. Okay, so it is particular to a problem, whereas system software is intended to make the computer usable. So this is one of the major difference. The second difference is that the the application software, it is machine independent, means it can be run on any machine which has a proper system software that supports it, whereas the system software is machine dependent. Why? Because they are designed by looking at the hardware of the machine, and hardware can change from machine to machine. So therefore it is machine dependent, whereas this one is machine independent, right? So we have already discussed about what are the different types of system software that we might deal with. As I mentioned a few, text editor is one system software, assembler, compiler, loader and linker, there's debugger, macro processor, and even we can say that operating system is a system software, but this itself is a broad category, and the support that is provided by operating system is somewhat different from the other system software that we are going to talk. So we'll not consider operating system as a system software as such, but of course the operating system, as we know, makes our computer system usable, right? So without an OS, it will not be possible for us to access the hardware and use it as we want. So of course, in that sense, we can say that operating system is also a system software. But if you look into this particular diagram, which gives you a broad overview of how exactly things are on the machine. So at the hardware level, right? So this is the hardware level. So we have the bare machine, which is nothing but the hardware. Okay, on the hardware part. On top of the hardware sits the operating system, right? On top of the hardware sits the operating system, and operating system, I don't know whether you have studied operating system or not. So there are different management that is performed by operating system, like it manages memory, it manages processes that run on the system, it manages the devices that are connected to your computer system, it manages the data, right? So different types of managements are there, or basically operating system takes care of these things by sitting on top of the hardware. Okay, but it actually uses these softwares in turn to achieve these tasks. Okay, so this is what the job of the operating system is. That's what I mentioned, that operating system, as per the definition, it can be considered as system software, but it is much more broader than what a system software actually does. So it basically involves the use of system software to accomplish a task, right? So we have got debugger, macro processors, etc., supporting the operating system. And since all these things exist on your system, an application program can simply be run on top of it, and users can access your system through the application program. So this is how the layer-wise division of systems. So as I mentioned, two differences are the machine dependency and machine independence. It is dependent because of the following things. Because as I mentioned, the hardware can vary from computer system to computer system. So mainly in terms of the following, like it can vary in terms of instruction set, it can vary in terms of instruction format, it can vary in terms of addressing mode, it can vary in terms of the languages that it supports. So depending upon that, the features of system software is also going to vary. So that's why it is called as machine dependency. And machine independence, as I said, it's basically uses a general logic design or strategy, and it basically performs its operations. Right. So this is what the major difference between a system software and an application software. So there's computer system. On top of the computer system, we have a software that involves or that is dependent on it. And on top of that dependent software, we run independent software. Okay, so here is the system or the hardware. So on top of the hardware sits the system software. On top of the system software, we have the application software. So this is how things are organized. So our focus will be only on covering the system software part, right? Now, how do we start them? So our aim here is to develop a system software. Okay, so we have to develop a system software. So how do we develop a system software? So as I mentioned earlier, that system softwares are hardware dependent. So if you have to develop a program that is hardware dependent, then of course you need to know what is the hardware or what hardware is present on your computer system, right? It is just like when you are purchasing a mobile phone, you need to look into what are the features that that particular mobile phone has. So without knowing the features, why would you purchase, right? So it is something similar where we are supposed to develop a software. So if I have to know develop a software, I have to know on which hardware it is supposed to run, right? You know that today's systems are highly capable and they are high performing, right? So we have systems ranging from fastest processor, expensive memory, and with high capabilities connected to different kinds and various kinds of devices. So we have all these things. So can we develop a system software for that? Or can we write a system software for an existing machine, right? Of course we can, but it will be difficult for us to focus on that. So what we will do is we will consider two hypothetical machines. Okay, we'll consider two hypothetical machines. Hypothetical means that does not exist. Okay, one system that does not exist. So we'll consider two hypothetical machines. We will take all the common features from the existing systems, of course, in a simplified format. Okay, so we'll look into two hypothetical machines, which are simplified version of existing computer system, right? So what are those two machines? So the machines are called as SIC. So it's extension, sorry, it's a short form for Simplified Instructional Computer. It comes in two different versions. One of them is called as the standard model. Another one is called as the XE model. So XE basically stands for extra equipment or extra expensive. So these two versions we are going to focus on. Okay. So imagine it like this. Okay, we need a hardware or we need a computer system on which we can run our system software. Okay, so we have got two systems. One of them is SIC and another one is the SIC bar XE version. So first we will look into the features of SIC machine, what exactly it has, what support it provides, what are the hardware configurations. So then it will become easier for us to write a system software on that. Okay, and remember that these are simplified version of existing computer systems. Of course, we will also look into its enhancement, which is the XE model. And then whatever system software we have developed, we will try to revise the same system software and try to run on this particular machine, which is SIC bar XE, or with extra features, what modifications we might do to our system software. That is what we are going to focus on when we are discussing about the SIC bar XE. Okay. Now, irrespective of what we do or what kind of system software we develop, we first need to know the features and capabilities of SIC as well as SIC bar XE. So let us focus on SIC first, and then later we can focus on SIC bar XE. Right? Now, one more thing to remember here is that both of them are upward compatible. Okay, so what do you mean by upward compatible? So upward compatible means if I have written a program on SIC, okay, any program on SIC, now the same program can be written or can be run on SIC bar XC. Okay. Or in other words, SIC is the lower version of SIC bar XC. Okay, we have the SIC. So it's a lower version of SIC bar XC. So a program written in lower level model can be run on higher level model. Okay, because whatever feature this machine has, so this machine actually has all of that, but with something extra. So whatever I have written here, so that should be able to run here on SIC bar X. Okay, that's what is upward compatibility. So executing or running a program that is written in SIC on SIC bar X makes it upward compatible. Okay, but it's not downward compatible. Okay, downward compatible means what? It's the exact opposite. Right? You have written a program in SIC or for SIC bar XC, right? By making use of the features that are present in it. You can't run that program, or you may not be able to run that particular program on SIC bar, sorry, on SIC standard mode. Okay, why? Because the features that are supported by SIC bar XC are not available in SIC. So if I have written a program using this feature, then of course these features are not available here. So I will not be able to run that program. So it is not downward compatible, but it is upward compatible. So both of these versions are upward compatible, right? So this is one more difference between SIC as well as SIC bar XC. So this comes with extra equipment. This is the standard model, and the SIC bar XC is upward compatible, but whereas SIC standard model is not. Okay, it's not downward compatible. Right? So this is one more difference. Now let us start with looking into the features of SIC bar XC. So not SIC standard model. Okay. So as it is mentioned, the SIC standard model is upward compatible, which means that you will be able to run the program that is written in SIC on SIC bar XC also. So when it comes to memory, right? When it comes to memory, so what is the features that it has, right? So when it comes to memory, this system only consists of 32 KB of memory. Okay, so in contrast, you can uh, remember that your mobile phone itself has about how much of storage? 256 or 128 or 64 or 32 GB. In terms of GB, we have storage capacity, right? But here it is only in terms of KBs. Okay, because as I said, it's a hypothetical machine. Need not worry about the storage. We just need to understand how exactly the memory is organized. Okay, so how memory is organized? So this 32 KB of memory is organized like this. So it consists of 8-bit bytes. So what does it mean? It means that one byte is around 8 bits. Okay, so this is how it is. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So it consists of an 8-bit byte. So this is 1 byte, right? And 3 consecutive bytes, something like this, will form one word. Okay, so 3 consecutive bytes will form one word. Okay, or in other words, word size is 24 bits. The word size is 24 bits. Okay, so this is how the memory is organized. Okay. Uh, then the next feature that we need to look into are registers. Okay, if you are familiar with the computer organization concept, then you will be knowing that memory is organized in a hierarchy, correct? So first comes the main memory or the RAM. Okay, on top of the main memory, we have the cache memory. On top of the cache, sorry, on top of the main memory, we have the registers. On top of the registers, we have the cache memory. On top of the cache memory, we will have the secondary storage. Okay, something like this, right? So there's a memory hierarchy that is followed. So of course, we all know that main memory is the faster one. The next fastest is register. The next fastest is cache. And the next fastest is the secondary storage. And you also know that with increasing speed, the capacity reduces. Okay, like for example, main memory size is comparatively less when compared with the secondary storage. Right? So the amount of information that you can store, it basically reduces with speed. Right? So when it comes to the different types of memory, one of the important type of memory that should exist are the registers. So we have seen that in computer architectures, registers are going to be there. So we name them as R0 to R1. Okay, we have different types of registers. So all of them are required for temporary storage in the processor and to perform operations. So we need registers to perform operations. So obviously we also need to understand here what type of registers are present in SIC. So there are 5 registers that are present. So we call them as AXL, PC, SW. The numbering is also provided beside that. So register A, its number is 0. Okay. And register X number is 1. Register L is 2. PC is 8. SW is 9. So what is this register A? So this register A is the accumulator. So if you remember, whenever you are performing an operation in a processor, one of the operand must be present in the accumulator. So this is expected. So accumulator is basically involved in performing operations, right? So we have the CPU which performs operations. So CPU will have this accumulator along with other registers, like for example R0 to R16, R15, sorry. So 16 registers or R0 to R31, so 32 registers. So like this, depending upon the machine, you will have different registers. But here we have a dedicated register called as A, which is accumulator, which is used to perform operations. Okay. So what is the next register? The second register is the index register. Its number is 1. So why do you require an index register? As the name itself indicates, it is used for indexing. Okay. Now when I say index, you already know that there is a specific data structure that you have already come across where you have heard this term index, which is an array. Okay. Basically, what is an index? Index is nothing but a pointer. Okay, so it basically is a pointer. So for indexing, we can make use of this register called as X. Okay. Now one more register is there which is called as L, which stands for the linkage register. So as the name itself indicates, it is used for linking. What it is supposed to link, we will look into that later. But to perform linking, this linkage register is actually used. Okay, of course, you are familiar with PC, which is a program counter. So it stores the address of the next executable instruction. Okay, like for example, if this is your program, right, and currently this particular instruction is being executed, and next instruction is this. Okay, next instruction is this to be executed. So the address of this particular instruction is stored in PC. Okay. Now remember, this may not be sequential always. It can be non-sequential also. But PC simply holds the address of the next executable instruction. Right. So which instruction should be executed? So that is pointed to by PC. Okay. And whatever happens on your system, the status of those are going to be stored in one of the register called as SW, which stands for status word. Okay, so normally the status word stores condition code, which can be used in decision making. right? So these are all some of the important registers that are present in our SIC standard model. So starting with A, X, L, PC, SW. So the numbering is as follows: 0, 1, 2, and directly jump to 8 and 9. So A is for accumulator, which is used in arithmetic operations or performing operations. Index register is the one that is used in indexing. Linkage register to establish the linkage or perform the linking process. PC will store the address of the next executable instruction, which is a program counter, and SW is the status word that actually stores the condition. So these are all some of the registers. So we have looked into what memory our system has, and we have looked into what registers does it actually have. Okay. Now we shall look into the data formats that are supported. So of course our computer needs to handle data. So what type of data is handled by this SIC machine? Okay, so it only handles one type of, not one, two types of data. One is the integer data. Okay, means you can only store numbers on this computer system. Okay, now how do you store number? So this number is stored in a 24-bit binary format. So it's stored in 24-bit binary format. So of course, when I say number, it can be positive or it can be negative. Okay. So of course, positive number we can simply store it in binary, but for a negative number we will be using a 24-bit binary format. Okay. Like for example, if I want to store 8 on my computer system, for example, if I say that I want to store this number 8 or integer 8 on my SIC machine, then what's the equivalent of 8? I believe it is 1000, right? So how many bits are there here? About 4 bits only, right? But what is the size of an integer? 24 bits. So all the preceding binary values are going to be zeros. So this will go on until the 24 bits. Okay. So this is how a positive number is stored. So if I want to represent minus 8, okay. So what will we do? We'll take the 2's complement. Of course, I believe you are familiar with the concept of 1's complement and 2's complement. All these concepts have been studied in computer organization. So we convert that to 2's complement and then we store it. Okay, like for example, if 1000 has to be stored, then how do we take a 2's complement? So we first invert the bits, correct? So 1 will become 0 and all zeros will become 1. And then I add 1 to it. Correct? And then I will add 1 to it. So when I add 1 to it, so this is 1 plus 1 is 0. 1 carried, 1 plus 1 is 0. 1 carried, 1 plus 1 is 0. 1 carried. Okay. So this is how. So I'm just using 4 bits here, but you are supposed to use 24 bits. Okay. So when you use 24 bits, of course, bits are going to be inverted. So this is how an integer is represented. So the other data that is supported is the character data. So you can store integers on the system, or else you can store characters on the system. Okay, how do you store characters then? So you store characters by using the 8-bit ASCII code. Okay, like for example, I think value of A is 60 ASCII value, and capital A is 90. Right, capital A is 90 and small a is 60. Okay, so the binary equivalent of 60 will be stored in 8 bits or basically a byte. Okay, so how do you do that? For example, I'm just showing this for reference. So 2 3s are 6, right? 0 are 0. What is remaining? 0. Right? 2 15. 2 7s are 14. 1 remaining. 2 3s are 6. 1 remaining. 2 1s are 2. How much is 1? So it is 1 1 1 1 0 0. Right? So 0 0 1 1 1 1. So how many? 6 is done. So of course 2 preceding zeros. Okay, so how many? 8 bits. So 60, ASCII value of 60 is represented. Got it? So this is similarly I can also store 90. Right, convert that to binary 8-bit format and I can store it on my computer system. So integer data stored as 24-bit binary number using 2's complement representation for negative values, and character data stored in 8 bits using ASCII. Okay, so when it comes to SIC standard model, there is no floating point hardware supported. So I can't deal with floating point data, only integer data is supported. So this is about the data format. So let's concentrate on the next feature, which are instruction format and the addressing mode. So when it comes to this machine, we have the following instruction format. Right now, see, why do we require an instruction format? Right. So we have a machine, and we need to run or write programs on this particular machine. So you need to follow a particular format to instruct this particular computer. So what is that instruction format? So instruction format is 24-bit in size, and the 24 bits are divided as follows. So 8 bits are dedicated to specify the opcode. 1 bit is the flag bit, and the remaining 15 bits are dedicated for address. Okay. See, I want my computer system to do something. I have to instruct it. Correct? We have to instruct it, and there is a format that you need to follow in order to instruct. Okay. In uh, general situation, like for example, you want to get a approval from the head of the department. Okay, so how do you get an approval? So normally you will write a letter, a formal letter, and you will specify the matter in that, but you will specify that in a format, right? So you will use that format that is used for getting the approval. So like you will write the from address, you will write the to address, and you will also write the salutation, you will write the subject matter, and then you write the body of the letter, and then you will write the salutation, right? So all these things are supposed to be followed. So there's a format for getting the approval. So if there's an application, then that particular application will have a format, and you follow that format and you get it approved, right? So this is also something similar. I want the computer system to do something for me, so I need to instruct it. So how do I instruct? You simply can't say anything and expect the computer system to work. So what we can do is we can follow the format that is specified by the system. So you follow the format. What is the format? This is the format that the system follows or understands. What is the format? Format is that you have to use a 24-bit format, and in those 24-bit, in the first 8 bits, you will be specifying the opcode. What is an opcode? Opcode is short for operation code. Okay, opcode is short for operation code. So why do you require an operation code? See, I want to perform operations on my computer system. Now, what type of operations I want to perform, right? So basically, I'm using computer system to perform calculations. So, like for example, I might perform arithmetic operations. I might perform memory operations, right? So, if I'm performing arithmetic operation, then I might want to perform addition, or I might want to perform subtraction, or I might want to perform division, etc. Right? So these are all the different operations that are possible on my computer system, and I cannot specify these operations as a whole. So what I will do is I will use short forms. Okay, and these short forms are nothing but the mnemonics, right? These short forms are nothing but mnemonics, and these short forms we call them as operation code. So there are operations, and there is a code that is associated with it. Okay, like for example, every student is associated with a USN number, right? So just like that, every operation will have a code associated with it. So that code you need to mention. which operation you are performing. So that code you are supposed to mention. Okay, so that is the opcode part. So when I am talking about an operation, okay, what do I require? When I am talking about an operation, what do I require? Of course, I require operands, correct? I need operands. So if I say add, for example, right, you should ask what I should add, correct? Then I will tell, okay, you add 5 plus 5, right? And you perform the operation and you will say that the result is 10. So I specified an operation, but along with the operation, I was also supposed to mention the operands, right? So this is also something similar. You tell in the first 8 bits of the 24 bit what is the operation that you are trying to perform, okay? And then you specify the operand, okay, or the address of the operand, where exactly it is present. So you are instructing the computer, in other words, you are instructing the computer to perform some operation using the operand that is present in this address. Got it? Okay, I hope this is clear. So you are supposed to use this instruction format to perform any operation in a SIC machine. Okay, so first we will specify the opcode, then I will specify the address of the operand. Okay, I'm not taking this separately as of now, I will come back to this. But as I said, we have to specify the opcode, means what operation computer is supposed to perform, and we also are supposed to specify which operand this operation has to be performed. Okay, so this basically makes up our instruction format. Okay, so this is our instruction format for the SIC standard model. So there's only one instruction format that you're supposed to follow. So no matter what you want to do on this SIC standard model, this is the only way to do it. Okay, so this is the only way to do it, right? Like as I mentioned, the example, general example. So if you want to get a Pakka permission from HOD, then you need to have it on a hard copy, right? So there are other ways also. Like for example, orally you can go and get the permission, right? Or you may not get the permission also. That's also possible. But if you want it to be clear, then you are supposed to get it on a hard copy, or in other words, you are supposed to get it on a letter, right? So that's the only way. So just like that, here also, if you want this machine to do something for you, then you have to instruct it in this particular way or using this particular instruction format. Okay, right. So once the instruction format is known, then as I mentioned, you are supposed to specify the address. Okay, so in every instruction format, you are supposed to specify the address along with the opcode. So in what ways you can specify the address? Okay, in what ways you can specify the address of the operand? So that basically makes up the addressing. Okay, so I think you might be familiar with this definition of addressing code. So the different ways in which an address of the operand, okay, the different ways in which an address of the operand can be specified in an instruction. See, this is an instruction, correct? This is the format that we follow. So in this instruction format, in what ways I can specify the address of the operand? So that is what is called as an addressing mode. Okay. So, like for example, if I want to address or call a particular student, I can simply call him by his name, right? Or else I can simply point at him, right? I can simply point at him, and then, like as I said, if he observes that, then that's also one way to address him. Or I can also call him as he or she, something like this, right? So there are different ways in which I can call. Right? Or there is different ways in which you can address a particular student. So just like that, when you are telling your computer system that you need to perform this operation on this operand, so where exactly this operand is? where exactly this operand is, or the address of the operand can be specified in different ways. Okay, so this is what is called as an addressing mode. So what ways are there in this SIC standard model that can be used? So there are only two addressing modes available, and to distinguish between each of them, we use this X bit. Okay, that's why I said I will talk about this X bit later, which is called as the flag bit. So this flag bit is 1 bit in size. So 1 bit means what? Either its value is going to be 0 or its value is going to be 1. So I can interpret this particular instruction in two different ways, when its value is 0 and when its value is 1. Okay, so what happens if the value of x is 0? So if the value of x is 0, then I can interpret that the addressing mode that I am using is a direct addressing mode. Okay, so when x is equal to 0, the addressing mode that is used is direct addressing mode. So what do you mean by direct addressing mode? So whatever address you have mentioned here, that itself is the address of the operand. Okay, or the target address is nothing but whatever address you have specified here. Got it? Or in other words, it's something like calling the student by directly by his name. Okay, so I will call ABC, come here, something like this, right? So I'm directly calling that particular student, and I'm using his name directly, right? So this is called as direct addressing mode when x value is 0, or when x is 0, it is to be known that the system is actually using, or the instruction is actually using the direct addressing mode. Got it? Okay. The second one is the indexed addressing mode. So how do we differentiate? So differentiation is the value of x. So if x value is 1, then I will know that it is indexed addressing. Okay, so index addressing. Like for example, I will not call his name. I'll just point a finger and ask him to stand up. Right. So I'm doing something extra. Right. So what is that extra? So in case of indexed addressing mode, the target address is going to be address plus the value of x. Okay. Or in the example, so instead of calling his name, maybe I don't know his name. Okay, so I will say third one from last bench, or right now whoever is just turned on the Google Meet and doing something else, right? You stand up, something like this. So I'm doing something extra here to get the target address. So if you are using an index addressing mode, then what you need to do, whatever value is present here, to that you need to add the index register value. Okay, like for example, as I said here, student are setting, right? I know student A's name, but I don't know student C's name. Okay, so what I will do is I will tell whoever is sitting beside, two places beside A, stand up, something like this, right? So address is this, but I can't reach that address directly. So what I need to do is I need to add the value that is known to me. Okay, so this is just a example to make you understand, but this is what index addressing mode is. Got it? So index addressing mode, when x is equal to 1, you add the value of index register to address to get the operand. When x is equal to 0, don't do anything, just directly consider the address field itself as the target address. Okay, so these are the two different addressing modes that are present in SIC standard model. Okay, so we're supposed to look into the other aspects as well. Of course, I believe time is up. So I'll continue that in the next session. But meanwhile, do wait, because here comes the important part of the session, which is the attendance. I believe an attendance sheet is also shared with you. but I'm also taking the attendance sheet. But you are supposed to enter the attendance there also using that link. We'll verify that at the end of the day. Okay. 94 students are there. I don't know if somebody has left at the middle of the session. Okay. So take on the attendance, but do enter the attendance sheet that was shared with you in Google Classroom. And I believe the next session will start maybe after 15 or 20 minutes. Okay. So we'll see you in the next class. Thank you, students.